All right, welcome back everyone to Vuln Vibes, ready for another deep dive.
Definitely. Always up for digging into some juicy vulnerabilities.
Well, today we've got a particularly interesting one. We're talking Tenda AC7 routers and this vulnerability that's been making the rounds. It's CVE-2025-1851, right?
That's the one.
Yeah, and stack-based buffer overflow CVSS 8.7. Not exactly small potatoes, huh? But I gotta ask, we see a lot of vulnerabilities here at Vuln Vibes. What makes this one, worthy of a deep dive? What makes it stand out?
Well, I think the main thing is the potential impact, right? We're talking about the possibility of an attacker gaining root access to your router.
Root access, huh? So what does that actually mean for, the average user? Let's break that down a bit.
So having root access basically means having complete control over the device. And in this case, we're talking about your router, the gateway to your entire home network. So think about it. An attacker with that level of control could potentially see everything you do online. We're talking banking details, passwords, personal files, all up for grabs.
Oh, wow, that's pretty serious. But, isn't there some sort of protection built in?
Mm.
You need to authenticate to even get into the router settings, right?
hmm
So wouldn't that at least make it harder for attackers to exploit this vulnerability?
Yeah, you're right. Authentication does add a layer of difficulty. But let's be honest, weak passwords are a dime a dozen, right? Plus, phishing attacks are getting more and more sophisticated these days. And on top of that, there could be other, unknown vulnerabilities in the router software that an attacker could use to get that initial foothold. And once they're in, authentication doesn't really matter anymore.
I see, I see. So basically, this authentication thing, while helpful, isn't a foolproof solution by any means.
Exactly.
And to make matters worse, right, there's a proof of concept exploit already available on GitHub.
That's right. And that's a game changer. It's not just a theoretical vulnerability anymore. Now there's a working exploit that anyone can get their hands on.
Yeah, that's scary. So just to clarify for our listeners, what exactly does this proof of concept do? I mean, what's the worst case scenario here?
So the current POC, as it stands, triggers a denial of service attack. Essentially, it crashes the router, making it unavailable. But, and this is the scary part, a skilled attacker could modify that existing code to deliver a persistent root shell.
A persistent root shell. What exactly does that mean in plain English?
Well, essentially, it's a backdoor into your network. It gives the attacker ongoing access to your router even after you reboot it. They can basically do whatever they want. It's like leaving your front door wide open.
Oh, wow. Okay, so this is starting to paint a pretty grim picture. And just to add to that, right, I was reading that Sensi's found over 14,000 Tenda router login pages just sitting out there on the internet, exposed.
Yeah, that's another huge concern. We don't know for sure how many of those are specifically AC7 models with this vulnerability, but the sheer number of exposed devices is alarming, to say the least.
Mhm.
It really highlights the scale of the problem, right? Even if a small percentage of those are vulnerable, that's still a lot of potential targets.
Right, right. So we've talked about the problem, the risks, how serious this all is. So what can our listeners do to protect themselves? I mean, what are the concrete steps they can take right now?
The absolute first thing anyone with a Tenda AC7 router should do is update their firmware. Manufacturers often release patches for these vulnerabilities, and that's your first and best line of defense. So check the Tenda website, see if there's an update available, and install it ASAP.
Okay, that makes sense. But what if there isn't an update available yet? Sometimes these things take a while.
That's true. In those cases, the best thing you can do is disable remote access to the router's web interface. Basically, make sure you can only access the settings when you're connected to the router's local network, not from the internet. Yeah, it might be a little less convenient, but trust me, it's an extra layer of protection that could save you a lot of trouble.
Good advice. So update if you can, disable remote access if you can't. Got it.
Exactly. And, this whole situation really brings up some bigger questions about security in the age of IoT, doesn't it? Like with all these internet-connected devices in our homes, are we doing enough to protect ourselves?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And shouldn't manufacturers be doing more to build security into these devices from the ground up?
Right.
I mean, it's great that they release patches, but sometimes it feels like we're playing catch up with the bad guys.
Absolutely. It's a shared responsibility. Users need to be aware of the risks and take steps to protect themselves. But manufacturers also have a responsibility to prioritize security and make it easier for users to keep their devices safe. It's a conversation we need to keep having.
Couldn't agree more. Well, on that note, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, stay vigilant, stay safe, and keep those routers updated.
Stay safe out there.
See you next time.